The cowboy went hunting, but fate delivered a dying Apache woman. The sun had barely begun to rise over the horizon when the cowboy swung his legs over the side of his bed. The small cabin was still quiet, with only the faint sound of the wind moving through the wooden walls and the distant cry of a hawk. He had slept lightly, as he always did before a hunting trip. Years on the plains had taught him that danger could arrive at any moment, and being prepared was the difference between life and death. He dressed quickly, pulling on his worn boots, a faded shirt, and a leather vest that had seen more seasons than he cared to count. His hat, battered and sun-stained, sat heavy on his head, and he adjusted the brim before stepping outside. The air was crisp and smelled faintly of earth and morning dew. He paused for a moment to breathe deeply, feeling the cool breeze against his face. There was a quiet beauty to the plains in the early morning, the way the sunlight spread slowly across the rolling hills and tall grasses, casting long shadows that seemed to move like living things. The cowboy knew every inch of this land, or at least he thought he did. The plains were familiar and comforting, but they were also unpredictable, and that unpredictability was part of the thrill of life here. His horse waited patiently at the edge of the cabin's small corral, its coat glistening in the first light. The cowboy ran his hand over the animal's mane, whispering words only they could understand. "Ready for another day?" he asked softly, although he already knew the answer. The horse snorted and pawed the ground, eager to move. He checked the saddlebags one last time, making sure he had water, a small supply of food, and his rifle, which had been cleaned and oiled the night before. Every detail mattered. Every tool and item could mean the difference between a successful hunt and a wasted day, or worse. He mounted the horse with practiced ease, the leather of the saddle creaking under his weight. As they moved into the open plains, the cowboy let himself take in the scenery. The grasses swayed gently with the wind, creating patterns that seemed almost alive. Birds darted from bush to bush, calling to each other, and a distant deer raised its head to watch them pass. Life was everywhere, vibrant and untamed, and he felt a connection to it that went beyond words. This was his world, and he had learned to read it, to understand its rhythms and signs. The hunt began in earnest as he followed fresh tracks in the soft soil. His eyes, sharp from years of experience, traced the movements of a herd of deer that had wandered into the valley below. He moved quietly, careful to make no sound that would alert the animals. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated. He had hunted here countless times, but no day was ever the same. Nature had a way of keeping him humble, reminding him that he was only a small part of a much larger story. As he moved through the tall grasses, the cowboy's thoughts wandered. He thought of the long months alone in the plains, the nights spent by campfires, and the sense of freedom that came with living so close to the land. He also thought of the hardships, the harsh winters, the scarcity of food at times, and the constant awareness that danger could strike at any moment. Life on the plains was not easy, but it was honest. It required strength, patience, and a respect for the land and its creatures. He had learned to survive, not just through skill, but through a kind of quiet understanding of how the world worked. The morning passed slowly, the sun climbing higher in the sky. The cowboy spotted movement in the distance, a flash of brown among the greens and golds of the grasses. He crouched low, careful not to be seen, and watched as a buck lifted its head, ears twitching. Its coat gleamed in the sunlight, and its muscles rippled beneath its skin as it moved gracefully through the terrain. The cowboy raised his rifle, taking aim with steady hands. He knew the moment had to be perfect. One wrong move and the deer would vanish, leaving him empty-handed. But as he focused, a strange feeling stirred within him, a sense that something was different that day. The air seemed heavier, and the usual sounds of the plains were muted, as if nature itself was holding its breath. He lowered his rifle slightly, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of danger. That's when he saw it, a figure, half hidden behind a cluster of rocks, moving with cautious, deliberate steps. At first he thought it was another animal, perhaps a stray coyote or a lost horse, but as he drew closer he realized it was a person. A woman lying on the ground, barely able to lift her head. Her clothes were torn, her skin smeared with dirt and blood, and she looked as if she had been running for days. Shock and uncertainty gripped the cowboy. He had heard stories of injured travelers and hostile encounters, but nothing prepared him for this moment. The woman's eyes met his, filled with pain and fear, yet also a strange calmness. He could see the life in her was fragile, hanging by a thread, and he knew he had a choice to make. To leave her would be easy, safer even, but something inside him refused to turn away. He approached slowly, speaking softly, though he doubted she could understand his words. His heart pounded as he knelt beside her, examining her injuries as best he could. She had been hurt badly, possibly attacked, and time was not on her side. Despite his fear, the cowboy acted with care. He removed his jacket and gently placed it under her head, trying to make her as comfortable as possible. He offered her water from his canteen, and when she could not drink, he let her rest, waiting for any sign of improvement. Hours seemed to pass, though in reality it was only minutes, and with each passing moment he felt a mix of hope and dread. The plains were beautiful, but they were also unforgiving, and he knew that survival depended on more than just willpower. It required action, quick thinking, and sometimes the courage to face the unknown. As the sun rose higher, casting sharp shadows across the land, the cowboy thought about the life that had led him here, to this quiet corner of the plains where fate had placed him and her together. He thought about the families he had left behind, the friends he had lost, and the countless days spent alone with nothing but the wind and his thoughts. And now here was a stranger, wounded and vulnerable, whose life was intertwined with his in a way neither could have anticipated. He felt a sense of responsibility, a moral weight that he could not ignore. The hunt he had planned that morning had been replaced by a far more important mission, saving a life. Time passed slowly, the wind whispering through the grasses and the sounds of the plains continuing around them. The cowboy stayed by her side, offering what comfort he could, speaking gently and keeping watch for any danger. He thought about the stories he had heard of the Apache people, their strength, their struggles, and their resilience. This woman, fragile and wounded as she was, embodied that resilience in a quiet, heartbreaking way. He felt a strange kinship, a connection that transcended words and history, grounded only in the shared recognition of suffering and survival. By mid-morning, the woman had not moved much, but her breathing had steadied slightly. The cowboy knew he could not leave her here. The plains were too vast, and danger lurked everywhere. He began planning how to move her to a safer place, a small stream he knew nearby where water was abundant and the land provided some cover. It would be a difficult journey, slow and exhausting, but he felt that every step was necessary. Every movement could make the difference between life and death, and he was determined to see her survive, no matter the cost. The cowboy looked once more at the land around him. The plains stretched endlessly, golden and green under the brightening sun. They were beautiful, yes, but also merciless, and he understood that survival required more than skill with a rifle or knowledge of the terrain. It required courage, compassion, and a willingness to act when others might hesitate. He had lived many years in these lands, but never had he felt a challenge like this. Never had he faced a situation that demanded not just strength, but humanity. As he prepared to lift the woman carefully onto his horse, he whispered words of reassurance, though she could barely hear them. He moved slowly, mindful of her injuries, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Every step, every adjustment was measured and deliberate. The plains around them seemed to hold their breath, as if acknowledging the significance of the moment. The cowboy's life had been defined by solitude and survival, but now it was being shaped by an encounter that neither he nor the woman could have foreseen. And so, with the sun climbing steadily, casting warmth across the endless grasslands, the cowboy began a journey that would test him in ways he had never imagined. The hunt he had set out for that morning was forgotten, replaced by a mission born not of skill, but of fate. Each step carried hope and uncertainty, and every moment was a testament to the quiet, enduring strength of both the plains and the human heart. For in that vast, wild land, two lives had collided, and the story that would unfold was only just beginning. The cowboy carefully adjusted the woman on his horse, trying to keep her movements as gentle as possible. She was light but fragile, and each motion caused her to wince softly. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, yet she clung stubbornly to life. The cowboy had never faced a situation like this. He had hunted, tracked, and survived countless challenges on the plains, but helping a wounded stranger was something entirely different. It required patience, care, and a courage that was less about strength and more about the heart. As the horse began to move slowly, the cowboy scanned the surrounding land. The plains were wide and open, dotted with clusters of rocks and sparse trees. The wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers and the sharp tang of dirt. Normally, he could ride without fear, knowing the land and the trails well, but now every sound, every movement felt heightened. A rustle in the grass, a distant cry of a hawk, even the soft clip of the horse's hooves against the earth seemed amplified. He couldn't tell whether danger would come from men, wild animals, or just the unforgiving land itself. Yet, despite the tension, he felt a strange calm. The responsibility he bore was heavy, but it gave him purpose. He glanced at the woman again. Her dark hair was tangled with dirt and leaves, and streaks of blood marked her skin. Her eyes, though filled with pain, seemed to hold a quiet intelligence, a story of suffering and resilience. She could not speak clearly, but a faint nod or shake of her head told him she understood him, at least in part. He whispered softly as they rode, "Hold on. You'll be safe soon. Just hold on." There was no way to know whether she understood his words, but the sound of his voice seemed to soothe her slightly. The journey was slow. Every few minutes he would stop to check on her, offering water from his canteen or adjusting her position so she wouldn't slip. He noticed the faint scars on her hands and arms, the signs of struggle and hardship. She had endured pain beyond what he could imagine, yet she had survived, and now it was his task to keep her alive. As he rode, memories of his own past rose unbidden. He thought of the times he had been wounded, alone, relying on nothing but instinct and willpower to survive. He knew what it was like to depend on someone else for care, even if only briefly, and it gave him a deeper understanding of the weight of his actions. The plains stretched endlessly around them, the horizon hazy with dust and sunlight. The cowboy knew there was a small stream nearby, a place where he could rest and perhaps help her recover more. The path was not easy. Rocks and uneven ground threatened to jostle her painfully with every step. The horse moved with care, guided by his steady hands and gentle commands. Yet, despite all precautions, he could see the toll the journey was taking. Her breathing grew more labored, and her eyes fluttered closed occasionally, as if the effort of staying awake was exhausting her further. As he rode, he noticed signs that told of the struggle she had faced. Broken branches, footprints that were not his own, and patches of disturbed earth suggested that she had been fleeing, running from danger or trying to escape something. It made him wonder about her story, about the events that had led to this moment. He felt a growing respect for her courage. She had endured so much, and now, in her moment of greatest need, fate had placed him in her path. He could not let her down. Hours passed and the sun climbed higher. The heat of midday began to press down on the plains, and the cowboy felt the sweat on his brow. He offered her more water, but she could barely lift her head. Her lips moved slightly, forming sounds he could not understand, but the tone was urgent, pleading. He listened carefully, trying to grasp her meaning, but it was difficult. Yet he sensed that she wanted to move, wanted to survive, and that knowledge strengthened his resolve. As they approached a small grove of trees near the stream, the cowboy decided it was time to rest. He guided the horse carefully to the shade, lowering her gently to the ground. She gasped slightly as she landed, but he was quick to place his jacket under her for comfort. He knelt beside her, examining the wounds more closely. Cuts and bruises covered her arms and legs, and she had clearly lost a lot of blood. The cowboy worked as quickly as he could, cleaning the worst of the dirt and trying to stem the bleeding. It was not much, but it would have to be enough for now. The woman looked at him, her dark eyes locking onto his. In them he saw fear, pain, and something deeper, a quiet understanding that he was not her enemy. He spoke softly, "I'm not going to hurt you. I'll get you through this." She blinked slowly, and he could tell that she somehow understood. There was a bond forming, unspoken but undeniable. Two strangers from completely different worlds, connected by circumstance and the fragile thread of life. He gathered water from the stream, dipping his hands and wetting a cloth to clean her wounds. She winced, but he continued gently, talking to her all the while. The wind rustled the leaves above, carrying the sounds of birds and insects, and for a moment it felt as if the plains themselves were holding their breath, giving them a quiet sanctuary. He knew that the rest of the journey would be difficult, but at least for now they had a small reprieve. The cowboy thought about the risks he was taking. If anyone saw him with her, they might assume the worst. There were settlers and others who might not understand, who might even try to harm her further. And yet, he did not hesitate. Morality and compassion outweighed fear. He had spent his life surviving, but now he realized that life was more than survival. It was about helping those who could not help themselves. He made a silent promise to himself that he would see her through this, no matter the obstacles. As the afternoon sun began to wane, he prepared to move again. Lifting her onto the horse once more required careful planning. He moved slowly, talking to her in the softest voice he could manage. "Just a little further," he said. "We're almost there." She did not respond in words, but the faint movement of her head was enough. He guided the horse along a path that he knew would be easier on her, avoiding rocks and uneven ground, focusing entirely on keeping her safe. The journey continued, and with every step, the cowboy became more attuned to her needs. He noticed the small shifts in her breathing, the slightest flinch that indicated pain, and adjusted accordingly. His own body ached from the effort, but he barely noticed. Every ounce of his attention was on her, on ensuring that she survived. There was a strange peace in this focus, a clarity that came from putting another's life above his own comfort. As evening approached, they reached a small clearing by the stream, where the water flowed gently over smooth stones. The cowboy dismounted, guiding her to a comfortable spot under the shade of a large tree. He offered her more water and a small piece of bread he had carried in his pack. She ate slowly, cautiously, but with each bite, he saw a flicker of life returning to her eyes. Relief washed over him, but he knew the danger was far from over. The cowboy built a small fire, careful to keep it low so as not to attract attention. The flames flickered and danced, casting long shadows across the ground. He kept watch through the night, sitting beside her and speaking softly. She had drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, but he remained alert, listening to every sound of the plains. Wolves, coyotes, even the wind could pose a threat, and he was determined that she would not face it alone. As darkness settled fully over the land, the cowboy reflected on the day. He had started out thinking it would be a simple hunt, a routine journey through familiar territory. Instead, he had found himself responsible for a life that depended entirely on him. It was a heavy burden, but it also brought a strange sense of purpose. For the first time in many years, He felt that he was not just surviving but truly living, connected to something larger than himself. The night was quiet except for the gentle rustling of leaves and the occasional call of an owl. The woman stirred slightly, and he offered words of reassurance, though she could barely hear. The bond between them was growing stronger, silent yet profound, built on trust and shared vulnerability. He knew that the next day would bring more challenges, but he was ready. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it with patience, courage, and care, because he understood that life, fragile as it was, deserved every chance to continue. And so, under the quiet watch of the stars and the gentle whisper of the plains, the cowboy and the wounded woman began the slow, uncertain journey towards survival, each relying on the other in ways neither could have imagined, each aware that the coming days would test them both. In ways they had never known, the night was quiet, the stars scattered across the sky like distant fires. The cowboy kept his eyes on the fire and his ears alert, listening for anything that might threaten the fragile peace. The woman slept fitfully, her breathing shallow and uneven, but each rise and fall of her chest was a small victory. He had never spent a night like this before. He was used to sleeping under the open sky, rifle at his side, but this was different. Now every sound mattered, every movement was significant, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him. Yet it was not fear that drove him. It was care, a deep, unshakable determination to keep her alive. Morning came slowly. A thin veil of mist hovered above the stream, and the sun's early rays lit the plains in a gentle golden hue. The cowboy woke before her, checking the surroundings carefully. The plains were beautiful in the early light, but they were also filled with hidden dangers. Predators roamed silently, and the occasional rustle in the grass could mean anything from a small animal to a larger threat. He adjusted the fire so it would not give away their position, then gently touched her shoulder. "Time to move," he whispered, and when she stirred, he offered a small smile. Though weak, she nodded slightly, acknowledging him, her dark eyes filled with a mix of pain and trust. He lifted her onto the horse again, careful to minimize any jostling. Each movement made him realize just how fragile she was. The small injuries, the blood loss, the exhaustion from fleeing, each factor threatened her survival. Yet despite all this, there was a spark in her, a quiet determination that mirrored his own. They began moving along the narrow path he had chosen, leading toward a sheltered valley where he could rest and plan the next steps. The horse's hooves pressed softly into the ground, and the sound seemed unusually loud in the morning silence. Every step reminded the cowboy that this journey was not just physical. It was a test of endurance, patience, and understanding. As they rode, he noticed signs of the struggles she had endured. Broken branches, patches of dirt disturbed as if someone had fallen, and faint footprints suggested she had been running, hiding, and perhaps being chased. Each clue made him wonder about the story behind the injuries, the life she had led before this moment. He could see strength in her, a quiet courage that had carried her this far despite the dangers. That strength impressed him, and he felt a growing sense of respect. She was not just a survivor, she was a fighter, even in her weakened state. By midday, they reached a small rise overlooking the plains below. The cowboy dismounted and led the horse to a shaded area, letting the woman rest for a moment. He offered her water again, and this time she drank slowly, carefully, her dark eyes watching him the entire time. He tried to speak gently, though he knew she understood very little of his words. Still, he explained his plan as best he could. They would move carefully toward the valley, avoid open areas, and find a safe spot where she could recover. He watched her closely, noting the subtle shifts in her breathing, the way she flinched at sudden movements. Every small detail mattered, and he felt a growing sense of responsibility weighing on him. The journey resumed, slower than before. The sun climbed high, and the heat of the day pressed down on them. He shaded her with his coat when possible, adjusting her position on the horse to keep her comfortable. Each moment was a delicate balance between speed and caution. Move too fast, and her injuries could worsen. Move too slowly, and they risked being discovered or delayed too long in the heat. He had learned to survive on the plains, but nothing had prepared him for the challenge of carrying another life with him, dependent on his every decision. As they moved, the cowboy tried to communicate with her. Words were limited, but gestures, soft touches, and careful expressions helped bridge the gap. He offered water, encouraged her to rest, and spoke gently when she winced. Slowly, a bond formed between them, a connection built on trust, necessity, and shared struggle. Though they came from different worlds, their experience in that moment was shared. He protected her, and in return, she relied on him for survival. It was a fragile connection, yet it was profound. The valley he aimed for lay ahead, hidden by gentle hills and clusters of trees. He had traveled through this area many times and knew it offered shelter, water, and a place to rest safely. Yet the journey was not without challenges. Uneven terrain, thick undergrowth, and the occasional steep slope demanded careful navigation. Every step required his full attention, and he guided the horse slowly, speaking softly to keep the woman calm. Despite her weakness, she seemed to sense his care and tried to cooperate, easing the burden of his task. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing surrounded by tall trees. The stream ran nearby, clear and cool, offering water and a place to clean wounds. The cowboy guided the horse carefully, letting her step down gently, then helped the woman to the ground. She sat, supported by his steady hands, and took a moment to rest. He knelt beside her, using a cloth to gently clean the worst of her cuts. She flinched, but he was patient, careful not to cause unnecessary pain. The sun filtered through the leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow across the clearing, and for a moment the plains seemed to pause, giving them a quiet sanctuary. The cowboy noticed the toll the journey had taken. She was exhausted, her skin pale and her breathing faint. He knew that without proper rest and care, she might not survive. Gathering small branches and dry leaves, he built a low, controlled fire, both to keep them warm and to signal their presence in case help came. He remained vigilant, scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. The plains were beautiful but unforgiving, and predators could come without warning. He understood that his vigilance was as important as any physical care he could provide. Throughout the afternoon, he tried to understand her story. Words were limited, but small gestures and expressions gave him glimpses. She had fled from a violent encounter, perhaps attacked while traveling or escaping from danger. The scratches, bruises, and exhaustion were proof of her struggle. Though he could not know all the details, he felt a deep respect for her resilience. She had survived long enough to reach him, and now he had the responsibility to carry her further, to ensure her survival. The woman stirred, opening her eyes briefly. He offered her water and spoke softly, "You're safe now, just rest." Her gaze lingered on him, a silent acknowledgement that he understood. Though no words passed between them, a silent understanding formed, a recognition of shared effort, struggle, and survival. The cowboy realized that trust had been established, fragile yet unbreakable, a bond born of necessity and humanity. As evening approached, he guided the horse closer, tying it securely and offering her food and water again. Though she ate little, each small bite was a victory. The cowboy remained patient, encouraging her gently, waiting for any sign of strength returning. Every moment was a test of patience and care. He reflected on his life on the plains, the solitude, and the harshness of survival, and understood that this experience was different. This was not just survival for himself. It was about another life, fragile and dependent, and he embraced the responsibility fully. Night fell once more, and he kept a careful watch. The stars were bright, and the cool night air brought relief from the day's heat. He spoke softly, recounting stories from his life, even if she could not fully understand. The sound of his voice seemed to comfort her, and he saw her relax slightly, her breathing steadying in response. The fire crackled gently, shadows dancing across the clearing, creating a quiet, protective space. For that night at least, the plains seemed to acknowledge their struggle, offering a moment of peace in the vast, untamed land. The cowboy thought about the days ahead. The journey to safety would be difficult, requiring patience, care, and endurance. Yet he felt a quiet determination. He had faced danger, harsh weather, and the challenges of survival before, but this was different. This was a test of his humanity, of his ability to care for another life when doing so might put him at risk. He was determined to see her through, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. Through the night he stayed by her side, keeping her warm, offering comfort and remaining vigilant. The bond between them deepened with every hour, silent but profound, built on trust, need, and shared struggle. He understood that this connection, fragile as it was, might be the difference between life and death. And in that quiet night, surrounded by the vast plains and the gentle murmur of the stream, the cowboy realized that fate had placed him here for a reason. For the first time in many years, he was not alone in the struggle to survive. Another life depended on him, and he felt a sense of purpose and responsibility stronger than anything he had known before. The plains were wide and unpredictable, the challenges ahead uncertain, but he was ready to face them. Together, they had endured the day, and together they would face whatever the next days might bring. And so, under the vast sky and the quiet watch of the stars, the cowboy and the wounded woman rested, bound by trust, care, and the shared determination to survive. Each moment was precious, each breath a small victory, and the story of their journey continued, uncertain but filled with hope, courage, and the quiet strength that comes from facing life's harshest trials together. The next morning, the cowboy woke to the soft glow of sunlight, filtering through the trees. The air was fresh and cool, carrying the scent of the stream and the grasses that surrounded the small clearing. He carefully checked on the woman. She had slept a little more peacefully than the previous night, though her breathing was still weak and uneven. Every rise and fall of her chest reminded him of the fragility of life, and he knew that the journey ahead would test them both in ways they could not yet imagine. He offered her water from his canteen, and she drank slowly, her dark eyes briefly meeting his. There was a flicker of recognition there, a quiet trust that he had worked hard to earn. The cowboy helped her onto the horse, adjusting her position gently so as not to cause her pain. He had spent many years traveling the plains, but never had he carried anyone so delicate, someone whose life depended entirely on his care and decisions. The journey ahead would not be easy. The terrain became rougher as they moved, with rocky patches and uneven slopes that demanded careful navigation. Each step could cause her injury to worsen, yet staying in one place was not an option. The plains were vast and unpredictable, and they needed to move toward a safer location before nightfall. As they rode, he observed the woman more closely. She bore signs of struggle, exhaustion, and pain, but there was also a quiet strength in her. She did not speak much, but her eyes told stories of courage and survival. He wondered what she had endured, what dangers she had faced alone, and what drove her to keep going despite her injuries. He felt a growing admiration for her resilience, and it strengthened his resolve to protect her. Every careful movement, every pause to offer water or shade, was guided by his determination to ensure her survival. The plain stretched endlessly before them, golden in the sunlight, dotted with rocks, shrubs, and the occasional tree. The cowboy knew the land intimately, but even familiarity offered no guarantee of safety. Predators could lurk unseen, and the harshness of the sun could quickly sap their energy. As they moved, he kept his eyes and ears alert, scanning for any sign of danger. A rustle in the grass, the distant call of a bird, or the snapping of a branch could signal something important. The weight of responsibility pressed on him, but he felt a strange clarity. Every decision mattered, and he was determined to act with patience and care. By midday, they reached a narrow path that led down into a valley. The descent was steep, and the cowboy guided the horse slowly, speaking softly to calm both the animal and the woman. She flinched with each jolt, but he adjusted his grip, steadying her as best he could. It was exhausting work, but he did not allow himself to slow down. The safety of the valley and the small stream within it was worth every ounce of effort. As they moved, he glanced around at the landscape, noticing the subtle signs of life, the tracks of deer, the disturbed earth indicating small animals, and the distant hum of insects. It reminded him that life persisted everywhere, fragile yet persistent, and that gave him hope. When they reached the valley, the cowboy led the horse to a small patch of shade near the stream. He helped the woman off the horse carefully, letting her sit with her back supported against a tree. She was pale, trembling slightly from exhaustion and loss of blood, but her dark eyes followed his every movement. He knelt beside her, offering water and examining her injuries once again. There were cuts, bruises, and signs of infection, but nothing he could not treat with care and attention. He cleaned the wounds gently, using water from the stream and a cloth he had brought along, talking to her softly all the while. "You'll be okay," he said, though he knew the truth was uncertain. "Just rest for a while. We'll get through this." She did not respond in words, but a faint nod and a soft glance in his direction told him she understood. Though the language barrier was significant, their shared struggle had created a connection that went beyond words. Every small gesture of care, every moment of patience, was strengthening that bond, creating trust that would be essential in the days to come. The afternoon passed slowly. The cowboy built a small fire to keep them warm and provide light, keeping it low and controlled so it would not attract attention. He gathered dry leaves and branches, arranging them carefully, and made sure the woman was as comfortable as possible. She rested with her head on his coat, and he remained vigilant, scanning the valley for any movement. The plains could be unforgiving, and he knew that even a small mistake could put them in danger. Yet, despite the constant awareness of risk, he felt a quiet determination. He would not allow harm to come to her if he could prevent it. As evening approached, he guided the horse closer and fed it from his supplies. The woman ate a little more than she had that morning, her strength slowly returning, and the cowboy felt a surge of relief. It was a small victory, but it mattered immensely. He spoke softly to her, encouraging her to rest again, and she closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the fire and the gentle motion of the horse nearby soothe her. Though she was still weak, there was a spark of resilience, a determination to survive that matched his own. The cowboy reflected on the events that had brought them here. He had set out that morning for a simple hunt, expecting a day of solitude and routine. Instead, he had found himself responsible for a life that depended entirely on his care and judgment. It was a challenge unlike any he had faced, and it tested him in ways he had never imagined. Yet, he felt a sense of purpose he had not known for years. He was not just surviving, he was protecting, nurturing, and offering hope. It was a different kind of strength, one that required patience, compassion, and a willingness to put another before oneself. The woman stirred slightly as night fell. Her breathing was uneven and she seemed restless, but the cowboy remained calm. He offered water and spoke softly, reassuring her that she was safe. Though she could not respond fully, the trust between them grew stronger. He understood that their bond, formed under extraordinary circumstances, was now a vital part of their survival. Each gesture, each word, each careful action reinforced that connection, creating a fragile yet unbreakable thread between them. The night was quiet, filled only with the sounds of the stream, the rustling leaves, and the occasional call of distant animals. The cowboy kept watch, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. The plains were beautiful, but they were also harsh and unpredictable. Predators, sudden weather changes, and the inherent risks of travel could threaten them at any moment. Yet, he remained vigilant, ready to act, knowing that the woman's life rested in his hands. He thought about what lay ahead. The journey to safety would be long and difficult, requiring careful navigation and constant attention. Every step was a test of endurance, patience, and empathy. Yet he felt a quiet confidence. He had survived the plains before, faced challenges, and learned the rhythms of the land. Now, that experience would serve a greater purpose. He would carry her through, guiding her carefully, protecting her, and offering hope where it was most needed. As the night deepened, he reflected on the fleeting nature of life. He had witnessed struggle and hardship countless times, but never had he felt such a direct responsibility for another's survival. The weight of it was heavy, yet it was accompanied by a sense of fulfillment. To protect, to care, and to act with compassion in the face of uncertainty was a strength all its own. He understood now that survival was not just about skill or knowledge. It was about heart, courage, and the willingness to face life's challenges alongside those who needed it most. Throughout the night, he remained beside her, keeping her warm, offering comfort, and watching for any sign of danger. The bond between them deepened with each hour, a silent yet profound connection built on trust, need, and shared struggle. Though the language between them was limited, their actions and mutual understanding spoke louder than words. They were no longer just two individuals surviving independently. They were allies in the fight for life, bound together by circumstance and choice. By dawn, the woman's condition showed small signs of improvement. Her breathing was steadier, her eyes clearer, and though she remained weak, there was a spark of life that had not been there before. The cowboy felt a surge of hope, tempered by the knowledge that the journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, and more tests of patience and skill. Yet he was ready. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it with determination, empathy, and a steadfast commitment to protect the life that had been entrusted to him. The cowboy prepared for the next stage of their journey. He offered her water and a small piece of food, adjusted her position on the horse, and spoke reassuring words. Though the plains stretched endlessly and the dangers remained, he felt a quiet confidence. Together, they had endured hardship, fatigue, and uncertainty. Together they would continue, guided by trust, resilience, and the understanding that life, fragile as it was, deserved every chance to survive. And so, under the rising sun and the watchful gaze of the plains, the cowboy and the wounded woman began the next leg of their journey. Each step was deliberate, each moment filled with care, and each breath a testament to the quiet strength of both the human heart and the untamed land. The days ahead were uncertain, but they would face them together, bound by trust, courage, and the unshakable determination to survive. The morning sun rose slowly over the plains, casting a warm glow across the valley. The cowboy had kept watch through the night, ensuring that the woman remained safe and as comfortable as possible. Though her condition had improved slightly, it was clear that her injuries were severe, and time was no friend. Every breath she took reminded him of the delicate balance between life and death. He had carried her this far, and now, in these final stages of her journey, he knew that fate would reveal its ultimate decision. He helped her onto the horse carefully, as he had done countless times before, speaking softly, "We'll take it slow. You're doing well." She did not respond in words, but her eyes held a quiet trust, a recognition that he was there, steadfast and unwavering. The bond between them had grown stronger with every hour of hardship, every cautious step, every quiet gesture of care. They were no longer just strangers thrown together by circumstance. They were companions, connected by survival, trust, and the fragile thread of life. As they moved toward a safer location, the cowboy noticed the signs of the journey behind them. Tracks in the soil, broken branches, and scuffed patches of grass told the story of the struggle they had endured. He thought about the courage she had shown, the quiet determination that had allowed her to survive long enough to find him. He felt a deep respect and admiration for her, mixed with the bittersweet knowledge that even the strongest spirit could be worn down by pain and injury. By midday, they reached a small clearing near a bend in the stream. The water flowed gently, clear and cool, offering a moment of relief and refreshment. The cowboy dismounted, helping her to the ground and offering water. She drank slowly, each sip a testament to her resilience. He worked carefully to clean and dress her wounds once more, using water and cloth to remove the worst of the dirt and blood. Though he knew his efforts might not be enough, he persisted, unwilling to give up. Every small action mattered. Every moment could be the difference between life and death. As they rested, the cowboy noticed a change in her demeanor. Her breathing was more labored, and her movements became weaker. A deep sadness settled in his chest. Despite all his care, he knew that her body had suffered too much and that survival was uncertain. He held her hand gently, feeling the faint pulse beneath his fingers, and whispered words of comfort. "You're not alone. I'm here. I won't leave you." Though she could not speak clearly, her eyes met his, filled with gratitude and a quiet acceptance. The bond they had formed was evident in that silent exchange, a connection that transcended words, built on shared struggle and compassion. The cowboy decided to rest beside her, keeping her warm and offering support as best he could. He built a small fire, low and controlled, to provide warmth and a sense of security. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the valley, and the air grew cooler. He watched her carefully, noting each subtle shift in her breathing and movement. Every detail mattered, and he remained vigilant, prepared for whatever might come. The plains could be unforgiving, and he knew that fate was not easily swayed. Yet he did not lose hope. He had carried her this far, and he would remain by her side until the very end. As evening approached, he reflected on the journey that had brought them together. What had begun as a simple hunting trip had turned into a mission of life and death. He had discovered a depth of compassion and resilience within himself that he had never known. Every choice he had made, every careful step, had been guided by a sense of responsibility and humanity. He understood that survival was more than skill or knowledge. It was care, patience, and courage. And in that quiet moment, he realized that he had been changed by the experience, forever shaped by the bond he shared with this woman. The woman stirred slightly, opening her eyes. She looked at him with a mix of pain, recognition, and gratitude. He offered her water and encouraged her gently. "You're safe now. Rest." Her eyes closed again, and he could feel the faint warmth of her hand in his. Though her body was weak, the spark of her spirit remained. He whispered softly, recounting stories of the plains, the animals, and the wind, hoping that his voice would provide comfort, even if she could not respond. There was a quiet dignity in her endurance, a strength that had carried her through countless hardships. As darkness fell, the cowboy remained vigilant. The fire flickered, casting dancing shadows across the clearing, and the stream murmured gently nearby. He watched the stars begin to appear, scattered across the sky like tiny beacons of light. Each moment was precious, each breath a gift. He understood that their journey was nearing its end, and he braced himself for whatever fate had in store. Though fear and sadness pressed upon him, he remained resolute, committed to offering comfort and dignity to the woman who had become so important to him. In the stillness of the night, the woman's breathing grew fainter. The cowboy held her gently, supporting her head and whispering words of reassurance. He knew that her time was limited, that despite his best efforts, her injuries were too severe. Yet he remained steadfast, refusing to let her face the end alone. He spoke softly, telling her of the plains, of the sun and wind, of the animals that roamed freely, and of the life she had fought so hard to preserve. Though she could not respond in words, he felt her presence, her trust, and the quiet strength that had carried her this far. Finally, as the first light of dawn touched the valley, the woman's breathing slowed, then ceased. The cowboy felt a deep ache in his chest, a mix of sorrow, respect, and awe. He held her gently, honoring the life she had lived, the courage she had shown, and the bond they had shared. Though her journey had ended, her story remained, etched in his memory and in the quiet land around them. He felt a profound gratitude for having been part of it, for having been entrusted with her care, and for having witnessed her strength and resilience firsthand. The cowboy carefully prepared a small resting place for her near the stream, using stones and earth to mark it with respect. He took a moment to speak to her, honoring her courage and endurance. Though she was gone, the connection they had shared remained, a testament to the human capacity for empathy, care, and compassion. He reflected on the journey they had taken together, the challenges, the struggles, and the moments of quiet understanding. Each step had been a testament to the power of human connection, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. As he stood, looking out over the plains, the cowboy felt a sense of both loss and enlightenment. Life on the plains had always been about survival, but this experience had taught him that true strength lay in compassion, patience, and the willingness to care for another. He understood that the encounters we have, however brief or fleeting, shape us profoundly, and that every life, no matter how fragile, leaves a mark on the world. He mounted his horse, pausing one last time to honor her memory, then began the journey back across the plains. The sun rose higher, casting warmth across the landscape. The cowboy rode slowly, his mind reflecting on the journey, the lessons, and the bond he had shared with the woman. He knew that her story would remain with him forever, a reminder of courage, resilience, and the power of compassion. The plains stretched endlessly ahead, full of challenges, beauty, and uncertainty, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Life was fragile, fleeting, and unpredictable, yet it was also precious, and the moments we share with others, moments of care, trust, and connection, were what made it meaningful. As he rode through the golden grasses, he thought of the woman and the journey that had brought them together. Her memory would accompany him across the plains, a quiet presence that reminded him of the value of life and the importance of compassion. The encounter had changed him, shaped him, and deepened his understanding of the human heart. He felt a quiet resolve to live his life with that same care and awareness, honoring her memory in every step he took. The cowboy continued his journey, the wind on his face, the horse moving steadily beneath him. The plains stretched endlessly, full of promise and peril, but he carried with him a new understanding of strength, courage, and humanity. The memory of the woman would never fade. Though fate had been cruel in taking her life, it had also allowed their paths to cross, creating a bond that transcended time, space, and circumstance. It was a reminder that even in the harshest lands, even in the face of death, the human spirit could endure, connect, and leave a lasting mark. As the sun set behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the cowboy rode on. The plains were vast, silent, and eternal, yet within their expanse he carried a story of courage, trust, and compassion. It was a story of survival, not just of the body but of the heart. And though the journey had ended for one, it would continue for the other, shaped forever by the encounter that fate had delivered, a quiet reminder that life, fragile as it was also profoundly beautiful.